Hey guys, today I want to talk about quick cast and quick cast settings. These are some of the settings that you can do when you go into your hotkeys options. There are quick cast settings in here, and there are three options. You have off, you have on, which is usually called on press, and you have on release. So we have off, on press, and on release. What do they do? Well, if something is off, essentially what happens is you click your button and then you have to also click your mouse wherever you're at. This means that for every action you do, there has to be two inputs to do it, which means that this is not quick cast. Then you go into hotkeys and you can go to on press, and on press will just wherever your mouse is, you'll immediately fire off your ability when you press the key. It doesn't give you any range indicators whatsoever. And then finally, there is on release, which is essentially, it's pretty self-explanatory. You push down the button, and as you let go of it, it fires off the ability. And this is one single press. It's slightly slower than on press, but it's faster than on click. So I've been asked a lot what my settings are and what I recommend. And the first thing I'm going to explain is that there are pros that use everything. Rich is pretty famous for using no quick cast settings on the majority of his abilities. So if he uses no quick cast settings on the majority of his abilities and he's considered one of the best players in the game, then it's okay to use no quick cast settings. However, the majority of the pros run on release, while I would say more do on press than do none at all. The reason I use on release is because to me it's a little bit of the best of both worlds. You get to see the range of everything, yet in tight situations, if you need to cast like a lot of abilities right away, then you can still do that without needing to worry about clicking a whole bunch of times on your other abilities. So, in my opinion, it's the best of both worlds with on release. Not only are things a lot faster, but you also get to see the range of your abilities. If you ever are on release and you want to see the range of an ability, you can simply right-click to turn off the indicator. So, in case you want to cast something, you just let go of it. But in case you want to see, am I in range? Say you're hiding in like a fog of war position. You want to know if you're in range to get to here before you just cast an ability. Because you want to see if someone comes down here and you're like, oh, I'll cast an ability. You realize you're not in range for that. You can right-click it, and then you can move closer into another position, and now you're in range to hit them with everything when they come through this area. So it kind of gives you those options. But what are some times that you don't want to be using this? And I want to show you a couple characters of areas where if you decide to go with one or the other, because overall it is mostly preference, but there's some characters that I feel like there could be some things you need to know. So Stitches is a great example of this. If he has abilities that you could really choose very specific things. For example, if you go with I don't need any specific level, I don't think. But let's say you go down here. And I have on release for everything, but do you really need on release for the E? You could just do on press, right? Because the second you mouse over something, that's what you're going to be using it on. You're not going to be like on releasing, trying to release on the character you want, which is why on some characters I find it best. Why do I keep going in there? Some characters I find it best to use very specific settings. So while I do on release on almost everything globally, what you can do, if you would like, is you could take this and you can make this on press for Devour, because you're never going to want to release on a different hero. So for example, let me toggle cooldowns really quick. You just press it and you're done, and it goes immediately. Then for an ability like your W, it's not bad to have this on release because you want to make sure that you're getting in range of your slow before you use it. So that one could be pretty good to have on release. I mean, it's okay to have on press as well, but you might be missing out on your slow a lot and not knowing why. So I think on release is a perfect option for this one. And if you are someone who goes on press for everything, I just want to explain why having on press for hook might not be great, because you might be sitting here and going, wait, I'll just hook this, and you're not in range. And you can try as much as you want, but if you can't visually see the range, you might not be able to like hide in an area and then hook someone the second they walk through this area because you're not in range to do it. So this is why I think some variations of this should be known. Even if you do think you've memorized every range on every hero, you kind of forget it after playing other heroes for a while and then coming back to one. Which is why I recommend, at least on release, for the hook abilities or the really long range abilities that you might need to like prepare. But for things like Devour, I think it's kind of required to have, not required, but it's just useless to have a range indicator on it when you can just simply press that and your character walks up and uses it. Anything that's like melee range, I don't think you need an on release. I think everything should just be on press if it's just melee range. The other things is when the range doesn't matter so much. And I want to show you this for a few heroes, but I'm just going to show you essentially one hero. And I did this in another video, but I like Tracer showing these particular things because they don't, the only one that really matters for her, let me set level really quick. So the only ones that really matter for Tracer for an indicator of the range is probably her Pulse Bomb, as a lot of people don't understand how short of a range this is. So, but in reality, with Pulse Bomb, you're going to be probably melee range with them anyways, so speed is key. So having a, where you have to click it afterwards is very, very important. But let's go into our hotkeys for a second, and I just want to show you really quick what everything looks like. So if you were to use the dashes, you can dash, 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 right? But I still needed to wait until I lifted up the key. And in reality, it's about the same amount of speed if you do on press or on release. But if you have to click in between each one of these, it does get a little crazy. So let's say, for instance, we put off. And even if we toggle cooldowns for a second, and then you have to do this, and it's a lot slower than if you wanted to do it. And the other thing that really adds into this is the fact that you might have a delay, because right now we have no latency in try mode, but there might be actual latency. I tend to put on, which is on press, usually for the majority of teleport or mobility things, purely because you want to make sure that you're moving as fast as possible. So a lot of times I do on press, which just looks like that. You know, like it's the fastest one, and it allows you to really get in and out of things. So Tychus's E, for example, Falstad's E, Tracer's Q, things that are just mobility, I want to make sure they go off as fast as possible. So I usually switch those to on press. That's the only major difference from a lot of the key bindings that I do, is I generally just do on release for everything because I like having that range indicator. Not just is it good for viewers, but it's just great for me in case I want to like set up in a bush and make sure that I'm in range for all of my abilities. And for things like Stitches to make sure that I've got that slow on. And then I'll put very specific abilities onto the on press if they are mobility, and everything else pretty much on release. But there are pros that use every sort of setting. So whenever I see people in chat or in forums that are like, oh, well, if you're not using on press, you're just bad. You should be using an ability enough to where you know the range of it and then have everything on press. I see a very negligible difference between on press and on release, and on release will have fewer mistakes. So if your abilities take a millisecond more to cast, but you're more likely to land your abilities, then I say on release is just naturally better. But I don't think there's one that is actually better. I think that it's generally just the ones that you get used to, and while you can make certain things more efficient, like mobility things, you can set those as on press. Long range skill shots you can set to on release. Overall, I feel like it's just preference. If you can, for consistency's sake, I say try to keep the majority of them whatever you're mainly used to, and then just setting a couple things to the things that are a little bit different. That's pretty much where we're at with that. I just felt like I wanted to do this topic because there was a lot of people who were complaining about this, and there's a lot of people who kind of bully other people about this particular setting, which I think is ridiculous. Because overall, it doesn't really matter. I mean, we have pros that are using literally off on the quick cast. So if some of the best players in the game can get away with no forms of quick cast, then you can't really bully someone into saying, "Oh, on press is the best thing." But I will say that some will feel easier when you are doing it because there are a lot less clicks. And I showed you Jaina, for example, where I had on release and everything, and it was very easy for me to just mash down my QWE over and over and over to just blow up someone. But on with a mouse, to have to click in between each of those just gets frustrating, can slow down what you're trying to do. So there are some abilities and heroes that I think it is better to have some form of quick cast on. So I would recommend trying out other forms of quick cast and just seeing what you might like. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to check out my other videos, and as always, appreciate subscribers.